Hello, 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 beautiful souls. How are you doing? Happy Friday. Rosanna here with a little Rosy Glow transmission for you. Now, remember, if you're new to me, Rosy Glow is the frequency of divine grace that I channel. And divine grace is the power of revelation that allows us to let go easily of what no longer serves us. And by the power of revelation, I mean those aha moments, when you hear something and it allows you to see something differently. And by then a door opens that before was closed and you can receive the gifts that are freely given, which is to move through the challenges that normally block your flow, and to be able to have a different experience. So anyone who's joining, please, can you just let me know you can hear me okay? Because sometimes I have fun with my Yeti microphone. I just want to make sure I can see someone's here. So please just drop me a little message and let me know you can hear me. Hello, hello, hello. I'm just going to keep talking and hopefully you will let me know you can hear me. So I am here today to have a little conversation with you on a soul level about these energies of grief and anxiety and fear, and how they can be transmuted into trust and into divine right action or divine flow, divinely inspired action. Now, my absolute favorite thing to be doing is to be supporting people to make a shift, an internal shift from an addiction to adrenaline, which is, yeah, great. Nice to see you, Anne. Thank you. The addiction to adrenaline, which is fear-based narratives, basically anything that gets our sympathetic nervous system activated, into an addiction for oxytocin, which is the love hormone that allows us to thrive, to feed, breed, to repair our cells, basically to regenerate rather than to survive. And I'm not going to use this video to go into the ins and outs of that, but in particular, as I work with those who are the creatives, the beings that are putting out new narratives into the collective consciousness, I have come to learn through my experience of working with them how important it is to raise their frequency, so that where they're creating from is their higher self rather than their survival programming, which we call the ego. And this is an important start to this conversation because we've been through a really huge change in the last 2 years, and it's been really, really difficult, like painful change. And we often view pain as bad. How interesting, Anne. And by that, I mean, we judge it. We give it a value judgment, but we don't really know how to grow except through pain in our current consciousness on this planet. And our media is fueled by fear, by pain, by trying to avoid pain and suffering. And so is the entertainment industry. So our movies tend to, in general, invoke adrenaline as a hormonal response in our bodies. And I do just want to say here that the neuro pathways that basically are triggered, will trigger this fear response in our bodies, are also the neuro pathways and the neurology, if you like, the neurobiology of the body, is also basically the same pathway for excitement. So is it scary? Is it exciting? Will depend on how you perceive it. But when we're looking at a lot of pain in the collective and we're seeing a lot of media basically glorifying violence, glorifying suffering as the norm, this is where we really have to look at ourselves and understand that we need to shift internally if we want to see the world around us shift. So what I'm actually doing as the basis of today's conversation is to take something that has come from a wonderful lady called Gay Landetta, I think it is. Let me just get her name right. She is a Gay Landetta, yes. She's a kinesiologist in Brisbane who's a friend of someone I'm working with. And I just loved what she was actually saying about the new year that we've come into, which is the Chinese New Year of the water tiger. And what I read really resonated with how we've just been through a year that was the year of the ox, the metal ox. And prior to that, we had the year of the metal rat. Now, I love the way my world mirrors to me what's going on. And just before we entered into this new year of the tiger, so even just before the calendar new year, I saw like 3 dead rats in different places, and I never see rats. And I was like, what's that all about? The rat is dead. That, you know, when you have the saying, I smell a rat, something's off. Well, something's been off in the collective in a major way in the last few years, and it's needed to come to this head for us to actually start to question things that up to this point we have never questioned. And this is the foundation of our beliefs, the foundation of how we see the world, of what we take as a given for granted. And, you know, you're not going to just do that because you feel like it. You're going to do that because you're pushed to. Okay, so I'm going to just read through this a little bit, because the transmutation of unpleasant feeling sensations, right, emotions, whether that is grief, whether that is fear, whether that is anxiety, into fuel that allows us to be able to trust the process of life, even if parts of it are very uncomfortable, and to be able to then trust again in the fact that it's okay to be heart-led. It's valuable to be heart-led. It's valuable to allow yourself to go through whatever life brings to you, because it's an exchange between the environment and your soul choices and your human choices and what goes on as a direct experience of that. But to then take action from a place of trust rather than fear and the need to avoid what is uncomfortable, because we know how to move through it. And again, I have to keep bringing in the entertainment industry, because it's very easy to misunderstand what I'm saying. When I talk about shifting a global addiction from adrenaline to oxytocin, that might give you the idea that all of the movies we're ever going to have, and the TV series we're ever going to have, and the books we're ever going to have are going to just be about fluffy bunnies and unicorns, and let's ignore the fact that things happen that are uncomfortable and blah, 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 right? But ultimately, it's not about that. It's about meeting the collective consciousness where it is and taking it on a journey into a new place. And that means using the entertainment industry to help us process emotion rather than to get stuck in and amplify certain emotions that are challenging to feel, and yet we are addicted to them. Because the global addiction to adrenaline or stress hormones, it's not just adrenaline, starts from our time in the womb. You know, this is my area of expertise, and based on our mum's baseline emotional state, that she's going to be feeding hormones to us all of the time. Her hormonal response informs us about the world that we're coming into. So depending on her perception of the world, we're going to have a predisposition towards stress hormones as our norm, or love, rest, repair hormones as our norm. And as a result of that, we will seek out the familiar, even if it's uncomfortable, because it just feels familiar. It feels like home, even if it's not comfortable, even if it's not pleasant. And this journey from the rat to the ox to now the tiger is like our invitation to kind of move from programmed human that doesn't really question what we've come into and why it is the way it is and how it could be different, into divine human, where we actually realize we have a part to play. We can shift what's going on in the world around us by shifting what's going on in the world inside of us. So let's take this. If we use the analogy right now of the fact that these last few years have been taking us on a journey of being asleep primarily in 2020 and uncomfortable in that sleep state, because basically we're unconscious of our connection to what is around us. In 2021, we moved into a state where we were, I've written it down, growing into some kind of acceptance that the world has changed, that things have shifted, that actually we can't see the world we did before the same way again, because we have shifted, our perception has shifted. We really had to bring out of us all of the stress response that was there and see just how freaked out we were. And some people have been really freaked out by what's happened in the last few years. Others basically have chosen to trust in their immune system, to trust in their capacity to influence their immune system through their well-being, through their perception of the world. And this is this thing about growing roots. What are we growing roots into? Are we growing roots into a healthy foundation, or are we growing roots into an unhealthy foundation? We've really needed to go pull up the roots and then go, right, what am I going to plug back into now? Like, you know, when you're in a stress response, a fear response, you contract, you go inwards. That's what 2020 was about. We all were in isolation, right? So now as we're branching out in 2021, this was all about, okay, what am I going to plug back into? Am I going to plug back into the mainstream narrative? Am I going to start to explore alternate narratives? Or am I going to establish my own agenda? What is the world I want to co-create? And I'm just explaining 3D, 4D, 5D in very simple terms. So those of you who've been on a journey with me have been on the path of growing roots into a reality that we want to co-create, not into someone else's idea, not into borrowed beliefs, borrowed values, borrowed perceptions, borrowed ideas around reality. We're really coming into what's real for me, what's true for me, what do I want to energize? And part of this is to recognize the value of these unpleasant and challenging emotions, and to recognize how much we contribute to our own suffering through our perception. So let me just briefly go into grief, right? You know, it is normal and natural to feel grief, for example, when we lose a loved one, especially if, you know, it was unexpected, it was sudden, there was a lot of suffering involved. Like, of course, we're in grief, right? No doubt about that. But part of our grief is down to the fact that we don't have a healthy relationship with death or with the other side. Would we feel the same way if we knew that our loved ones have actually been freed from tremendous suffering, whether it's self-induced or as a result of something they've experienced, and they're actually in such an amazing place? They are so happy, so in a good way, that they can't wait for us to join them. But in the meantime, we get on and we live our lives here on earth and we make the most of it. Like, do we understand here that as humans, especially as a result of our cultural and religious conditioning, we'll have a different experience and expectation of our afterlife, of what actually happens? Do we reincarnate? Do we go to hell? Do we go to heaven? Who came up with these ideas anyway, right? So grief is an interesting one, and we can grieve for ourselves, we can grieve for others. Very often, regret and grief are related because we grieve stages of our life that have passed. And so we can easily end up in the past, not in the present. And the present is the moment of power. And this moment of power allows us to shift how we're seeing things so that we can move forward. So we push pain away, we push grief away, we push what we're scared of away, and we do everything we can to prevent ourselves feeling these things. But what if we actually welcomed them to us? What if we got curious about them? What if we allowed ourselves to have a dialogue with them? What if we actually thanked them for the role they're playing in our lives? Because, you know, the lower you feel, the more excited and love you can feel, right? It's the contrast, this polarity, that allows us to fully experience the highs and the lows of being in a human body, having a human experience. Now, I say this not being in chronic pain myself. So if you are in chronic pain, whether it's emotional or physical, this might sound like I'm being rather glib, and I do not intend to be this way. I'm just intending to explain that to transmute something, we can't resist it. We have to bring it to us. We have to welcome it so that it can be transmuted. All the time that you're denying it, resisting it, pushing it away, refusing to engage with it so that your light can transmute, can infuse it, the harder a time we have, right? And it's the little shifts that we actually make in our consciousness that will allow us to experience more freedom, more ease, versus more struggle, more suffering, more pain. So we get these pain and grief and anxiety and fear teachers so that we can actually start to embrace what we would normally run away from, okay? And create new narratives that will allow us to be able to actually have a different experience to our ancestors. This is so important because we're seeding the future. Now, anxiety, you know, what is anxiety? Anxiety is born of the mind, right? Anxiety is born of what could happen in the future. And so whether we're living in the past or we're living in the future, we're not in the present. The present is your moment of power. And so anxiety about what could happen is usually fueled by us being fearful, being programmed to expect the worst rather than to expect the best. So a simple mindset shift in terms of moving from what what could go wrong to what could go right really helps us again to start to take charge of our physiology, of our nervous system response. But we have to remember that we're living in a world that at the moment triggers anxiety and fear all of the time, right? Because up until now, this is what we have put our attention to. This is what we've got hooked on. You know, think about the TV series that are dramas that are literally cliffhangers at the end of each episode to get you hooked into the next one. Now, are these cliffhangers that are exciting, positive, enjoyable cliffhangers, or are they more or less you know what's going to happen? You can't bear the idea of it, but you can't help but watch it, right? So we have been fueling this addiction to fear and adrenaline and anxiety, because it's all related, and grief, because this is what we've been putting our energy into. Now, if we want to cultivate trust being a balancing force, then we have to understand that ultimately we get given the lessons we do to start to make new choices so that we can have different experiences. And we can't control everything. We know people are going to die, they're going to get sick, unexpected things will happen. We put a value judgment on whether they're good or bad, and then we keep energizing that value judgment as good or bad without recognizing that out of literally every bad thing that happens, good things come, right? Out of everything we perceive as bad, as unfortunate, as bad luck, as terrible, as whatever we call it, new comes. Think about the bushfires in Australia as an example. You know, they were horrendous, they were really bad, but they do give birth to new life, right? This is what happens. This is how things shift. So embracing everything rather than resisting it is going to allow us to start to take charge of our nervous system and to basically take a journey from where we have been all this time to where do we actually want to go. So if we want to shift, for example, a global addiction to adrenaline into one that is oxytocin fueled, then we are going to need to shift our focus to the things that actually invite that feeling, the good feeling within us that is oxytocin fueled feeling, right? So, you know, when you love someone, there's oxytocin pumping through your body. When you're stroking a cat or you're holding a baby or you're seeing something that makes your heart warm up, this is oxytocin in action. Okay, so how are we going to shift this? Well, we do need to basically shift our focus as to what we talk about, what we write about, what we watch, what we listen to, and ask that question, is this taking me into a heightened state or is it contracting me? Is it expanding me? Is it taking me into a good feeling or is it taking me into a familiar feeling that is uncomfortable but familiar and therefore what we keep feeding? And I call this in the simple terms, in terms of my star piece movement, I call this really like post about where the media gets it right. Share about the movies and the TV series and, you know, the whatever else is out there, the songs, the albums, the books that are seeding this positive narrative into the consciousness of humanity. Because what we are requiring at the moment is a way to move through pain to pleasure, right? Through suffering to comfort, to that sense of, I can lead my way through challenging times. I can move through this. I don't need to get stuck here. Because most of us are carrying a whole load of unprocessed, challenging emotion that some call trauma, traumatic experiences, basically things that have happened that were too difficult to process at the time. So they've been stored in our cellular memory and our energy field and pass the message to us to try and avoid this kind of pain in the future. And until we clear this from us, until we bring it to light and we actually move through it, then we're going to end up in a situation where we're still trying to avoid what is uncomfortable. If you lean into it, if you embrace it, if you dive into it, it's just like birth. You resist a contraction, you push away from a contraction, you hunch your body, you hold your breath, you push it away. It's really painful. You start to move with it, you start to breathe into it, you start to say yes to it, thank you to it. I know it might sound crazy, but it actually transmutes that pain sensation. It allows it to become something else. And there are people that have had orgasmic births. They've literally shifted that pleasure pain edge in their neurocircuitry and their perception of what was going on. So instead of it being painful, it was pleasurable. Now, please don't think I'm saying let's get addicted to hurting ourselves. Let's gain pleasure from hurting ourselves, because this is not what I'm saying. I'm just talking about leaning into what we would normally contract away from and being curious about how we can shift it. So why do we believe what we believe? What is it founded on? Is that foundation solid? Does it need re-examining? These are the kind of questions that will allow us to move out of judgment into observation, into curiosity about what else is actually possible. And this, my friends, is the playground that is the 5D frequency of Paradise Earth. Now, we have way more than 5 dimensions, okay? So when I talk about the 3 to 5D bridge and I talk about multidimensional consciousness, it's the 5th dimension, if you like, that allows us to access everything else, because it is fueled by the heart. It's fueled by the presence of all that is, rather than the conditioning that we call the mind, but is actually the brain. Because we can tap into hive mind of whatever the hive consciousness is. So that could be automatron hive mind consciousness. We could tap into divine mind. And that is a whole other frequency of infinite possibilities. But our hearts lead us to what is absolutely imperative for us as our soul missions to actually embrace and explore and move through. So authenticity is another element here I just want to explore quickly. Welcome those who've joined. Hello, Kirsty. Lovely to see you. And authenticity is about just your truth, how you really feel, what you really think, what you really perceive, right? And you have to kind of have an honest dialogue with yourself before you can decide whether or not you want to shift that belief, that feeling, that idea of what is real and what isn't. Okay, so authenticity is like not trying to keep anyone else happy, not trying to do what other people have told you is right, but actually to explore internally what is true and what is right for you. Even in the world of spiritual teachers, you know, there's all these kind of rules that come and expectations about what you should be like if you're a spiritual teacher. Dare you smoke, dare you drink, dare you party, dare you do anything to upset your finely tuned instrument of channeling or being able to perceive or whatever. Like, there's a lot of judgment in the world in general. And all we can do is learn that as souls growing and evolving into oneness, we learn to move beyond the judgment of right and wrong and actually to experience what is right for me now, and then to be open to exploring that and re-examining it in the future. So all of us on this journey of moving from the grief, the anxiety, the false evidence, emotion, and expectation appearing real, into trust, into divinely inspired action, divine right action. We have to actually embrace our shadow. There's no way around it. We have to embrace the bits of us that we don't love, that we do judge, that we wish other people didn't see, and to accept that at this stage, this is part of who we are. This is our authentic truth. I am this and this, right? And in order for me to be balanced, I need more of this and less of this right now. But all of us, as we move through in our ascension pathway, are integrating the darkness into the light. We're not trying to stop one existing without the other. We're just integrating it as it comes up. So if you're not suppressing, repressing, denying, pushing away that which is difficult to deal with, then we actually create so much more acceptance in us, which is the growing of the roots of 2021. And so we can accept other points of view, we can accept why some people suffer more than others. We can accept that every one of us has our own journey, which is unique to us to come into oneness. And we can also accept that though most of us here on this earth are not clear what happens when we actually pass on out of our physical bodies, there are those who do have clear memory. There are those who do recount both moving through the passageway of death and also past lives, etc., that we can be inspired by to take a different view to the one perhaps that we have been indoctrinated with. Because all of us have had different indoctrination in our early lives, and some of us have had shared indoctrination. There's societal, there's cultural, there's religious, there's our family's indoctrination. There's also, the country that you live in, that indoctrination, the society in terms of your socioeconomic class. All of this kind of thing comes up and affects our perception. So we are learning to expand our vision, and we're learning to expand beyond the right and wrong, noticing where we judge, where we don't want to forgive, where we insist that something is a certain way. And this will tell you where your rigidity is. This will tell you where the roots of your suffering is. Because, what's true of all of the sages? What is true of the teachers, like the ascended masters that we all tend to love and aspire to? Compassion, courage, forgiveness. Like, what are the qualities that they have? If we are ascended masters in training, we're learning those qualities too. So let me go a little bit more into this, because I was given, what I love about the way things work for me is that, hey Joseph, good to see you, I think. Vom Red, not quite sure what that's all about. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes. So one thing I love in my perception of the way I see the world is it feels like I'm living magically. Okay. It feels like I get these messages in the world around me, and then I get sent the information to verify what I'm picking up. It's amazing, right? And in that way, when I'm channeling Rosy Glow, there's a real innocence coming through, because it's just coming through as inspired perception, right? That's coming through me that wants to be shared. And through this, we'll then start to get the evidence, whether it's the science studies or whether it's someone having sent me some information that verifies what I'm actually talking about on some level in our human terms. And that's great. But what I want more than anything is for you just to open your hearts to being inspired to see things a different way. Because inspired action, divine right action, comes from putting your soul in control. Now, your soul is the part of you that is leading you to all of the experiences you need to go through, whether they're painful or not, for you to then be able to liberate yourself from the suffering that is self-induced, okay? So that you can allow yourself to thrive. Whereas your ego or your persona or your the bit of you that likes to control things in order to feel safe is totally stuck in survival. It's not programmed to thrive. It's trying to keep you safe, but it's like having a child under the age of 7 driving your car, insistent it knows where to go to keep you safe. And the perceptions that that child has are going to be very different to having an adult view where you can see things differently and in a wider perspective, right? So we do need to put our soul in control, our higher self in control, to be able to actually have the shifts in this world that we want. And yeah, let's just take this. So we've had 2 metal years, and metal is basically the energy of grief. Okay, I think I've got this right. Metal is the element, metal element is autumn. It's about falling away. It is about self-worth, and it is about letting go. It is the time to clean out old negativity. So the emotion is grief that comes up with the metal cycles in these 2 years we've just had. And on some level, we've all been experienced grief, because grief is basically the response to things not being the way we want them to be. That the way things are isn't the way they were, and we're mourning the fact that they're not better in our perception than they were. So we're mourning and we're grieving for what once was. And this has affected us all in different ways. Some of us have lost loved ones, etc. In the Shen cycle, which is the regenerative cycle in Chinese medicine, it is said off metal runs the water. Now, water, which is the element that we're in for the next 2 years, is all about trust. And once we fall into trust, grief does fall away. Okay? It is said that the controlling cycle, metal chops down wood. Wood is growth, the energy of spring. So if we try to grow before we have fallen into trust, the grief will chop us down. Now, there's something here about when we're motivated to change something. So our willpower, okay, Our willpower and our ambition, where is it coming from? Is it ego-led, trying to survive, or is it soul-led, seeking to thrive? That's why until you put your soul in control, you know you're going to be motivated by a desire to avoid the painful, challenging emotions and feeling states that basically help us to grow if we actually work with them. So let's just take this a little bit further. One of the messages I've been having for a long time is that those of us who are awakened and awakening are like the water running through the cracks. You can't stop us, okay? You can put walls up, but there'll always be somewhere that we can get through. The big wall of illusion and delusion that has been the world as we have known it, all of us, all of our lives, is basically coming down. It's coming crumbling down. Some areas have cracked, other areas are coming down, but we're like the water, the pressure behind this wall that is finding our way through, where we're basically going, it's time for new growth, right? It's time for something different. We're ready. There are enough of us in our world at the moment to positively impact the narrative so that we can actually shift. We can totally shift into a new paradigm if we want to, but we have to co-create it. And this is one of the things as part of the awakening process, is we can get really stuck in the, oh my goodness, look what's happening. Oh my goodness. This is terrible. We added judgment to it. This is terrible. Oh my goodness. Look, have you seen this? And like constantly feeding the fact that we've now seen something we couldn't see before. So we do need to celebrate being able to see something, even if it's unpleasant, as a way to moving into a new arena. But we don't want to get stuck on it. Okay, this is happening. This is definitely not feeling like something I want to energize. What would I like instead? This is how we start to co-create our reality, right? This is how the water that runs through, that's flushing the old way, needs to be clear and running clear. And through this, there are emotions that need to be processed. So water is the ultimate inflexibility as it flows around all obstructions. Water is the holder of fear and anxiety, but also willpower and ambition. Trust is the balancing factor. We'll go there in a sec. As it is a yang year, it is an energetic year, but from that watery sense of flow and trust in our inner knowing. To trust, we have to back ourselves. You have to believe in yourself. That's what this is all about, right? And the reality is that that is hard to do in this age of fear and doubt. So the reality is that this is hard to do in this age of fear and doubt. Once we enter the world, we so easily get pulled back into the controlling co-cycle. And, you know, this is the thing about understanding the elements of reality. I'm just going to stick with my bit here. So if water is the holder of fear and anxiety, and we are like 70% water, then we need to clear that fear and anxiety from us, right? And by clear, we need to just process it. That's what I mean. And this is then what can lead us into trust. So all the time that you're blocking feeling something, experiencing something, you're basically preventing the flow of it transmuting. Now, let me just come back to the title. So transmuting grief, transmuting anxiety and fear into trust, so that we can allow divine right action. Basically, the invitation is to move beyond the judgment of this being right or wrong, good or bad, and actually to start asking the question, what is this teaching me about myself and the world? What would I like to create instead of this? How am I contributing to this unpleasantness? What can I do to support myself through it? This is all really powerful. These questions are very powerful, and they're just coming through now as I'm sharing with you. So to trust means to back yourself, to have utmost faith in yourself and your process, to believe in yourself, your gifts, your intuition. Now, this is so contrary to what we've ever been taught. So we're learning this together, right? But this is the point, is the process of transmutation is alchemical. Moving from one state into another. We need movement, we need breath, we need flow. It's the blocking that is the problem. It's the holding tight and refusing to allow it to come through that is the problem. So if we want something to change in our lives, firstly, meet it, greet it, thank it. There's something called the Ho'oponopono, which is amazing to utilize for anything, like any aspect of yourself that you want to change, anything that's going on in your world, anyone you feel really angry or resentful towards, any pain you want to process, like meeting it with the Ho'oponopono dissolves and transmutes because it's bringing love to everything. There is a reason why we have contrary things in this world. It is to help us to create. If it was all just peace, love, and daffodils, we'd get to a point that we'd be bored. So I've been saying for a while that the game of life has changed from a game of chess to a puzzle, right? So when I talk about being a game maker, I mean that we just change, we create a whole new game out of what was into something new. So we're not changing the rules of an old game, we're creating a whole new game. Does that make sense? I hope that is clear for everybody as you watch this. So what comes with this is the fact that in this new game, the star peace game, if you like, what is really being required of us is to recognize that instead of constantly trying to find a balance and avoid war, right, or feeling like the only way to get things changed is to go into battle, the whole concept around star peace and around this new game where we're all a puzzle piece in the great big puzzle of paradise Earth, so we're creating it together, is how we can resolve conflict. There will still be conflict, there'll still be challenges, there'll still be things coming, but how can we grow from them? How can we evolve beyond the old? How can we create something new from it that is more desirable, right? How can we meet the unpleasantness in the world in a way that instead of resisting, suppressing, repressing, we can move through the challenging moments faster, more gracefully, more easily? This is the invitation. So in downloading the peace codes, it doesn't mean we're all just going to be sitting there feeling peace all of the time. It means that we're going to be able to move through our challenges in a different way, to embrace the more difficult aspects of being on Earth and to grow through them in a way where we're not passing a legacy on to our future generations of avoidance, avoid this, avoid that, but we're actually teaching the codes for moving through things that in the past we didn't have the tools to be able to move through. So we're in a really pivotal time. And that leads me just to wrap this up, because this water tiger energy is courageous energy. I just want to mention very quickly that what's going on in Canada, which is just absolutely phenomenal, right? Like, it is amazing. You know, the people with the dirty nails are the ones that have taken their power back and gone, no way, we are not acquiescing to this. We are not saying yes to this. We are not prepared to actually just bow down and go, okay, then whatever you say, president, prime minister, government, media. No, humanity's pulled together. They've got huge backing, whatever you're hearing in the mainstream media, huge backing. And despite whatever efforts the current leader is making to play down how many people are involved, it's huge. But you won't know this if you are not looking at alternate media channels. You will only know this if you have dug deeper than the mainstream narrative that is currently being put out. And here's the interesting thing. We very often blame the media. We blame the politicians for what they do, for the way they show up. And yet, actually, they're just feeding into what we've basically allowed them to do for such a long time. If we're the ones that are addicted to giving our power away, because that's what we've been taught to do, we've been programmed to do generations before, and that's just what we do without questioning it. If we are the ones that basically keep turning the telly on, even though we don't really want to engage with what is there, then we have to make some choices about what we're going to energize and how we're going to energize it, right? So this is the whole point, is to allow yourself at this stage to say, okay, what I focus on grows. So what do I want to energize? What do I want to see about this world around me? And what do I want to create from what I am learning? Because if we want things to shift, we're going to need to make clear what we want instead of what is being offered, instead of what is being proposed. And that's why I say to you, imagine a world where You know, I'm inviting you to use your imagination, because the power of imagination is the power to bypass that old programming, because all you ever do is create the future from the past if you resort to your thinking brain all the time. Through your heart, you can start to access feeling states when you engage your brain to imagine the new, to imagine that which excites and inspires you. And rather than go, oh, that's never going to happen because this is the way it is, we then are in a state where we can say, all right, how can I contribute to this? How can I contribute to the evolution of our planet, of our society, our global society? How can I be part of the solution rather than the problem? And we will start to see a shift in, I look up there because that's where the television is. We start to see a collective, a shift in what is being put to us, because we're asking for something different. We're demanding for something different. We're saying this isn't what we want anymore. And that's the power we have. We've got way more power than we realize. So I feel I'm going to leave that there today for everyone. But I hope this invites you to, rather than this being like a how-to and just do this exercise and this will happen, it's like coming back to being curious about how we contribute to our own suffering and how we can shift our perception of ourselves and the world around us so that we can be more curious in the areas where we tend to judge. And, you know, the difference between polarity and duality is this. Polarity is like darkness, light, black, white, water, stone, right? It's not saying good, bad, right, wrong. It's not judgmental. It is just looking at the contrast that exists to create form. Now, obviously, we can say aligned with love, not aligned with love, right? We can say potentially harmful, as in could induce pain as a result of this action, potentially beneficial. But what we want to be doing is moving beyond the value judgment, because the value judgment keeps us stuck. And if all everyone is doing is what they've basically been programmed to do, everyone is playing their part beautifully. For those of us who want to actually step beyond the programming and say, let's do something else now. And that's what we're doing. So I'll leave that there. Please do comment. Let me know what's inspired you, what's excited you about this, and what you'd like to know more about. And remember that if you want to join me for weekly divine embodiment of your higher self, then that's Monday evenings, UK time 7:30. It's 2:30 EST. And I'm online with the multidimensional yoga, which is embodied prayer. It'll give you an upgrade every week. Also, we have the New Moon co-creations, which are here live on YouTube, but you can also join my inner circle for a small fee for the full moon activations and healings. And this is when we earth and birth the seeds that we actually grow with the new moons, or we plant with the new moon. And the next available date, which I'm going to invite all of you to come and celebrate with me, is Monday night, the 14th of February, Valentine's Day. I'm going to be hosting my yoga as normal, and also the full moon co-creation on that day, because it's very close to the full moon. So if you want to bathe in self-love, in basically just totally owning your lovely energy, because it's the Leo full moon, okay, then come along and bathe in the self-love that will allow you to attract love as you recognize your divinity. And those of you who are ready for some deep diving, those of us who are the consumers are basically ready for fearless, loved up and free to be me. So that's the majority of the population. Those of us who are the creators of what is being put out in the collective, you may be interested in contacting me. I have one spot at the moment for my next one-to-one client to take you through the journey of unplugging from the dodgy programming and plugging into your divine matrix coding. So what you put out in the world is the highest expression that you can, your soul expression, through your art form, through your creativity, as your gift to this world, to support the ascension, to support those to move through the pain rather than get stuck in it. So if you want to know more, get in touch. I love you all very much. Have a beautiful weekend.